Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to wait for our dignitaries and our panelists to come up to the stage before we officially open the Africa Investment Forum. Thank you very much. If you could make your way to the stage, gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen, please could you take your seats? The proceedings are about to begin. The Africa Investment Forum is all about vision becoming a reality. The focus is on less talk, more action. Less protocol, more action. And of course, the overriding mantra of the Africa Investment Forum, transactions, transactions, transactions. On the principle of less is more, I share with you two quotes. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results, Albert Einstein. Coming together is a beginning. Staying together is progress. And walking together is success. Henry Ford. Ladies and gentlemen, on that note, it is my honor to introduce to you the Premier of Gauteng, David Makura, who will officially open the Africa Investment Forum.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. The President of the African Development Bank, Dr. Adesina, the Minister in the Presidency of the Republic of South Africa, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, heads of the various multilateral institutions and various institutions of the bank, ambassadors, high commissioners, heads of various delegations from across the globe, particularly the development banks, Asia, Europe, and the Americas, business leaders and investors, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Finally, the inaugural Africa Investment Forum of the African Development Bank is taking place, and it is with a great sigh of relief and tremendous sense of pride that I welcome you to our beautiful country, South Africa, and our golden province of Gauteng in the great city of Johannesburg. This historic inaugural Africa Investment Forum could have taken place anywhere in the continent. It could have taken place in Kigali, Nairobi, or Addis Ababa. It could have taken place in Abidjan, Accra, and Lagos. It could have taken place in Cape Town or Cairo. But we are honored that it is taking place in Johannesburg. On behalf of the Gauteng Provincial Government, I want to thank the President, Dr. Adesina, for giving us the opportunity to host this very, very important, first of its kind investment forum in our continent, in South Africa. We are as Gauteng province, the economic engine of our country, the manufacturing hub of sub-Saharan Africa, and Johannesburg is the financial and technological nerve center of our continent. It is indeed a great honor that we are hosting this. This investment forum takes place at the most exciting time in South Africa. South Africa is poised for great times ahead. Our President Cyril Ramaphosa, has identified investment as one of the centerpieces of his presidency. Only 2 weeks ago, he hosted the inaugural South African Investment Conference. Out of that conference, 290 billion rands were raised in investment. We are convinced, as the President will say so tomorrow, that this conference builds momentum around investment. It is time for our continent to move away from aid to investment. It is time for Africa to transition from poverty to prosperity, and we believe this must be achieved by this generation in our lifetime. Aid impoverishes and entraps Africa in a dependency trap. And we know today, in the 21st century, that Africa is the biggest investment frontier. So the Africa Investment Forum, as we called it in May, is the Davos of Africa. It is less about talking, but more about transactions. We want to make the 21st century the African century. And it is time for Africa to turn its potential into real improvements in the quality of life and in the quality of infrastructure. South Africa is ready for business, and Gauteng is ready to contribute to Africa's economic integration, inter-Africa trade, and industrialization. You are welcome.
Before I introduce the esteemed panelists on the stage, it is my honor to ask President Adesina, President of the African Development Bank, sir, this is your vision becoming a reality. And certainly as CNBC Africa, over the last 11 years, we've watched you execute with your teams across the board. I think it's fair if we ask you for your thoughts as we kick off this momentous event, the Africa Investment Forum.
Thank you very much, Browning, and good morning to everybody. Let me also thank the Premier. He's been doing an incredible job. Please put your hands together for him and his Premier Makura and all of his great team. My big sister, Dlamini Zuma, is here. Dr. Zuma was the chairperson of the African Union Commission when she got it all started on the issue of Agenda 2063. And I want to say, Madam Zuma, that was a very clear vision. It is now for us, and I mean collective us, to fast track that agenda to deliver as one. Let me say, it is a great pleasure to have all of you from around the world. The world is here at, in your province in South Africa. My father, who passed away sometimes this year, sometimes it's hard to not think about what he said to me and how he brought me up. My father always, whenever we were in school, if you came back to the house and he said, what's your exam look like? What does it look like? You came number 7, you came number 10. My father always said, well, the person who came first, did they have 2 heads? Why can't you be number 1? And I think that I constantly think about that. Africa must be number 1. Africa will not be at the end. We must fast track everything that has to do with Africa, because poverty is not tradable. There's nothing we're going to do. We're not going to be the museum of poverty in the world. As the mayor said, we want Africa to prosper. We want prosperity to share with our people, and we are very impatient to actually get there. The second thing that I was taught by my parents was my mother. She's still alive. My mother taught me that when, I grew up in the poor neighborhoods and we had to learn how to sweep. And she showed me a broom. And that if you look at the broom, it has different strands. And Your Excellency, Mr. President, President of Ghana, please welcome President Akufo-Addo. And she says the strands are singular, but when you put them all together, that's when you can actually sweep. And that's exactly what we are trying to do here for Africa. And my wife is here, and I'm gonna, otherwise I might keep on sweeping at home for quite a long time. What are we trying to do? We know that Africa has infrastructure challenges. We know that that deficit is quite huge. We've been talking about it for quite some time, $68 billion to $108 billion. However, we know that the resources are there to be able to do that. If we are able to tap into the global pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, but most importantly, tap into our own belief, our own self-confidence, our own ability that we have the resources, the human resources, we have the domestic resources, we have the leadership to do it, and what we have to do is just, like my mother taught me, bring all those broomsticks together to work as one. Now, what you have here is not just the African Development Bank. What you have here are the partners that are actually working with us to being able to do this. You have straight at that, let me.
Are you going to do it for me, sir?
I might, if you don't mind.
100%.
President Banda, the president of Islamic Development Bank. My brother Dlamini here is the president of the Development Bank of South Africa. You have president of AfricaRoom, the president of the Trade Development Bank, the president, CEO of the Africa50, and you have at the end the president of the Africa Finance Corporation. These are the partners that we have brought together. The Africa Investment Forum is not an event. It is a platform in which we are bringing together the governments, the private sector, the project promoters, and the investors to be able to fast-track deals. You may ask yourself, well, what's different? We've been to forum, this one's different? This forum, as you will find out throughout the rest of the 3 days you are all going to be with us, it's all about transactions. And I want to say that this is not a show and tell event. This is an event in which we are coming together to develop quality bankable projects, to make sure that we can de-risk those projects, to make sure that we can fast-track the closure of those deals, to make sure that we collectively can work to ensure that the policy, the legal, the regulatory environment that actually precludes most transactions from happening, that we can actually make sure that it happens. When you land investment sometimes in Africa, I know it's sometimes bumpy. And it's like you got a prop plane, it goes and it's a bit bumpy like this. We don't want investments landing in Africa in a bumpy way. We want investments landing in Africa in a smooth landing strip that's very well organized, and I have every confidence that working together, all that you see around here and you that are out there, that we can make this Africa Investment Forum to be the platform on which investments can land like a smooth landing strip in Africa. Just to close, let me say the role of our leaders are very critical. We have President Akufo-Addo here. You're going to have several African presidents that are going to be here. And what that suggests to us is that Africa's leaders are actually doing business differently. We are seeing our leaders as CEOs of their own corporations, if you want. So, Mr. CEO from Ghana, let me welcome you, Mr. President. And you are going to be within boardroom conversations throughout the next 2 days so you can help to fast-track development. I want to thank all the partners for being together with us. We're going to work on developing projects, de-risking projects, fast-tracking deals, closing deals. But one thing together, we are committed that we will fast-track Africa's development. We are not here to discuss aid. We're here to discuss investment because countries develop. No country develops by aid, but every country develops by the discipline of investment. And that's what these next 3 days are going to show. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you very much, President Adesina, Premier Makura, and thank you, sir, for allowing me now to deep dive into the conversation after handling those introductions so eloquently. President Hajar, if you could, sir, give us your sense of excitement around the Africa Investment Forum, the viewpoint of the Islamic Development Bank.
Thank you, thank you. First of all, the Islamic Development Bank has a long partnership with the African continent, and 27 out of 57 countries are African member countries in Islamic Development Bank. And the first ever project funded was in Africa, in Cameroon in 1976, and I remember at that time it was about $7 million. Also, the total commitment of the Islamic Development Group is reached about $48 billion since the inception in 1976 until now. This covered about more than 3,000 projects in the African countries, and also the ISIC is the Trade and Investment Insurance has insured about $21 billion operations in trade and investment in Africa, in addition to the $6 billion in investment, foreign investment. ITFC, the trade arm of the group, also financed about $11 billion trade, and the last initiative of this entity was about in the Western African countries, developing the cotton sectors. In addition to that, there is ICD, also invested about $480 billion in different, to promote private sectors in Africa. So the relationship and the partnership of the Islamic Development Group with African countries is strong, and we are here to strengthen the already strong relationship with Africa.
Talking about collaboration and strengthening relationships, Patrick Lamini, Development Bank of Southern Africa. Sir, let's get your voice into the collaboration stage.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. Thank you to President Adesina, actually, and Premier Makura, because what you're seeing here today is the beginning of great things. It says to me, we are at the cusp of meaningful and tangible things to unfold. But as technocrats, because I always say, if you look at the people here, with the exception of Premier Makura, we make things happen. We are not politicians. And Premier Makura also
on his behalf, Premier.
Premier Makura also makes things happen, which means actually identifies with us. That's why you see him amongst us. So it's quite key. Thank you very much. I think, Broman, it's very critical that we begin to reflect on what lies ahead of us as the continent of Africa. It is very key that we get to understand that things happen not because of their automaticity. Things happen because leadership has been provided. Because when there is leadership, you see the difference. When there is leadership, you see people beginning to have hope because they can see that things are coming and their lives are going to turn for the better. When here you talk about Agenda 2063, and you talk about SDGs, and you talk about the NDP for South Africa, it says when you see this collection of leadership coming together and saying, let's make things happen for the continent, let's put together investment. The Africa Investment Forum is really something that I am saying, as President Adesina says, that the risk capital that is so much needed to drive projects into investability will now begin to happen. I'm hoping also that it's not going to be the last time that we're meeting, to promise to this powerful audience in front of us, but we are saying we're coming together because of a common need for the African continent to begin to drive its future and to lead foreign direct investment so that people can be able and get confidence from our leadership on the continent, from the African continent. African Development Bank plays such a critical role as our multilateral institution. We really, really, really can make things happen. I thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm very grateful and positive for the future.
President Orama, from an Africa Export-Import Bank perspective, bearing in mind the theme is delivering as one for Africa, let's get you to put your hat in the ring.
Thank you very much. Mr. Premier, Traditional, Excellencies, Mr. President, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, we are very, very honored to be here, and we thank President Additional and his team at the African Development Bank for organizing this. This is truly visionary. It should have happened years ago, but better late than never. Apart from what we are doing today, the greatest benefit that will come out of the Africa Investment Forum is the rebranding of Africa. Africa has always been seen from the CNN syndrome of disasters. We only see wars, crisis, and so on. But today there is money in Africa. We are telling the world that the continent is an investment destination. With the leadership of the African Development Bank, which has convened all the Pan-African institutions, the multilaterals that are here, there can be no better story to tell any private investor that opportunities here can be exploited profitably and with low risk. We estimate that Agenda 2063 will require about $300 billion in annual investment in infrastructure. That is huge. But the good thing is that we have the money here in Africa. If you look at about $800 billion in pension funds, that are estimated to rise to $1.1 trillion in 2020. That tells you the level of accretion to that fund. If you take the stock of reserves, just shy of $500 billion, other sources of funding that are available, you can see that the continent can afford the $300 billion of the investment annually. But there's no other way to convene it than the way what we are doing here today. Because the platform that is being created will make it then possible for us, the multilaterals and other development partners like DBSA, to come together, pull ourselves together and address common problems and bring confidence to outside investors. We must do something so that the $63 billion that are coming as migrant remittances coming for investment and not for consumption. We must do something to accelerate and increase foreign direct investment from the very low level of $42 billion. We're not going to have development by just having $42 billion foreign direct investment. We at AfricaRoom Bank are focused on African trade. We are focused on intra-African trade and intra-African investments. And one other thing I will have to plead with President Additional is that as we do this, we must put intra-African investment at the center of what we are doing. Because it's intra-African investment that we promote intra-African trade. It is intra-African trade that will drive the transformation of the continent. We can only gain dynamic comparative advantage We can only gain dynamic comparative advantage if we trade more with ourselves. If we don't create the investments and the infrastructure that will make it possible for us to begin to produce the light manufacturers that China will soon stop producing, we will find ourselves looking for other countries to start exporting the same thing to us. But it's the kind of decisions we make here, the choices we make today, that will begin to change that.
Thank you very much, President Harama. I'm going to come to President Tadesse, President of the Trade and Development Bank. And again, if we're talking about collaboration, doing things differently, give us your stance on the Africa Investment Forum with that caveat, time to do things differently, business unusual, sir.
Well, I'm glad to hear you saying doing things differently, because the truth is we are partners. I can definitely state very clearly here that everybody on this panel is a cooperating partner of our bank. We co-finance, we do many different transactions together. When President Adesina mentioned to me that he had this idea to launch this initiative, what really appealed to me was the idea of the platform. Because there's a lot of forums on these topics, as we all know. But what really has been missing is getting a group of very strong financial institutions that can actually push the agenda, facilitate the process of getting more investment in. It's all about scaling up. We know that investment has been on the agenda since the turn of the millennium. Some of you may remember NEPAD. When the African Union was formed in Durban, I have very warm memories of how the issue of investment was put back onto the table after 2 decades of almost no investment in Africa. So now we're sitting at fairly decent levels of investment, but way, way short of what we need in order to bring that transformation about. So scaling up really is the issue here. If you look at the magic number of 25% fixed capital formation was the number that was identified at the turn of the millennium in Durban. And that 25% number, we're closer to it, but we're not there yet. If you look at what the Asians are doing, the tigers or the newly industrializing countries, they're sitting at 35, 40% investment levels. So the reason we really have to keep pushing this collaboration is to scale up. We're not doing enough. We're doing a lot, but certainly not enough.
Alain, let me get you to contribute to what President Tadesse said in terms of scaling up. Let's take that theme forward from an Africa 50 perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Bronnie. And I want to thank President Adesina and Premier for allowing me to address this audience. I think I'm very excited about the future of our continent for many reasons. And I will build on the point that President Adesina and my friend Admasu raised. You know, there's a consensus today across the board from policymakers, all the key stakeholders, that we have to find a way to increase the role of the private sector in funding, on bridging the gap, the investment gap that we have on the continent. That's clear. That policy debate is behind us. Everybody agrees. Now, the other thing which is also exciting on this continent, I think Admasu mentioned that earlier, a number of things are happening already. There are a number of transactions which are closing in many countries. The leaders of those countries are here. I won't mention one particularly, but there are a number of IPPs that are closing, private investment in infrastructure. We need to talk about those good success stories because success actually breeds success. Now, I also agree that we are nowhere near the kind of amounts that we need to invest on this continent to make a significant impact and to help our fellow Africans have a better life. Now, just 1 or 2 figures that I'd like to give. This continent received about $8 billion on average in the last 5 years on average in private investment in infrastructure, $8 billion. If you compare this to Latin America, which is receiving about $45 billion, you see that there's a big gap that I don't know why we cannot close that. In fact, I believe that we can close that gap. So we should try to set ourselves a target to move from the average $8 billion a year that we are getting on private sector investment in infrastructure in Africa to bigger numbers. Maybe not $45 billion the first 2 years, but we can set this as a target. And the Africa Investment Forum is one of those instruments which would allow us to move more rapidly towards this kind of target, because
that will help us fast-track projects. And I have at least a couple of examples of projects that Africa 50 is leading, that this forum, the Africa Investment Forum, has already helped fast-track. And we'll be signing a framework agreement this afternoon on a very iconic project, the Two Congo Bridge project, which is connecting Congo, Brazzaville, and DRC. This is the Africa Investment Forum has helped us fast-track the project. Of course, it's a platform that will continue to actually to work on that project, but this is the kind of things that the Africa Investment Forum will help us do, fast-tracking and doing much more than what we are doing today.
Malama, CEO of the Africa Finance Corporation, I say to you, sir, transactions, 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 and you say?
Thank you for this opportunity. The Africa Investment Forum, for us, is a demonstration of our aspiration for a coalition of investors to reduce the infrastructure deficit on the continent. Our gathering here today is a first step towards that. We are excited that we have all the multilaterals here with us, and some of the DFIs are active on the continent, sitting here to do transactions on the continent. We believe that in this room, we have the capital that we need to move, I would say, faster than we have done before. We have the decision makers that should demonstrate the political will to make projects bankable. And we have on our side the resources to meet them halfway with the development capital that is required to make projects bankable. So for us, this is a very important first step. We have agreed that we are going to continue to work together. We have agreed that we would use the Africa Investment Forum as a platform to close transactions. We have several transactions that we have been working on. The Africa Investment Forum has allowed us to fast-track that process. We are looking at transactions in Cairo for a mega petrochemical naphtha cracker that should create the base for additional manufacturing on the continent. We are looking at several other investments in power, in transport, natural resources, and heavy industry that would move the country forward. We hope that this opportunity will allow us create more opportunities for intra-Africa trade. Intra-Africa trade is very low when you compare to EU, we compare to Asia, where the figures there are about 69% and 59% versus our 10% of intra-Africa trade. We hope that this platform will give us the opportunity to mobilize investments, to integrate the continent so that we can do more together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So in terms of utilizing that phrase of doing business unusual, we have 25 minutes till 10 o'clock. At 10 o'clock, it's a hard out for this opening plenary session. And I think that we have an enormous opportunity in that we are sitting in a boardroom filled with the leaders for the next 3 days, the Africa Investment Forum visionaries and the co-partners. So gentlemen, we have 25 minutes. I want us as an audience to gain insight as though we are in your boardroom. Why is this going to be different? Delivering as one for Africa. We've heard about the teamwork. Now can you take me that step further, bearing in mind, gentlemen, 25 minutes, and we need to move the conversation. President Adesina.
Well, I just want to start off with the issue of the fact that the money to actually fast-track that development is here. I am not scared about the numbers that I hear. When people talk about the infrastructure, that you need to invest, let's say roughly $170 billion for infrastructure. Africa cannot develop without electricity. Africa needs roads, rail, ports, and all of that. We all agree on that. That's not the issue. It's the money. But let's just look at it for a moment. The global pension funds that you were talking about and sovereign wealth funds, all those assets under management is $56 trillion. If you add to that the case of the mutual funds, and you add to that the insurance fund, that's about $133 trillion. But leave those ones aside, just focus on the $56 trillion. To close the gap, the infrastructure gap for high fives, to light up and power Africa, to feed Africa, to industrialize Africa, to integrate Africa, and to improve the quality of life of Africa, we have of Africans, we've actually done the estimate that shows that we need to invest $170 billion. What? I'm sorry, that is 0.32% of the total pension funds and sovereign wealth funds assets under management globally. And so you have an asymmetric locational capital. It's out there, but the needs are here. And we know that where you have a deficit, where the rate of return is going to be higher, if you can manage the risk. So this Africa Investment Forum platform, if we can just get 1% of those assets under management to Africa, as we are talking about, we will close that gap in no time. Talk to what the president of the CEO of the Africa 50 was saying about even our resources domestically. Pension funds, and President of AfricaRoom was saying it, pension funds and sovereign wealth funds in Africa today, $622 billion. So, but if you look at all those monies, they have been invested in low-interest money market instruments outside of Africa. So the sovereign wealth funds of Africa become sovereigns for others. But yet we have huge infrastructure gap on the continent. So what we are saying with this forum is how do we help to tap into our own resources domestically, create that infrastructure as an asset class for these pension funds and sovereign wealth funds to invest in that. 27% of that, we will all be done with this. So what you see here when you see us talk about platform is also structural. We really think that we need to look inside. We need to tap into the domestic resources that we have. The other thing that I want to say that's very important, and that's very significant with this meeting. See, all of us that are here, this is the first time this is actually happening ever in Africa, that the heads of all the financial institutions are coming together and saying, you have risk-sharing instruments. You deploy partial risk guarantees. We do the same. Why don't we bring it together? If you have a big transformative project, let us collectively do that. You mentioned the boardrooms. We are in the boardrooms. Just to give you a sense of what it is. This meeting, we have roughly about 303 deals and transactions that are going to be discussed in boardroom sessions for a total value of $208.8 billion in this platform. For this particular session, because if you're going to eat, you got to eat in bits, and so that you can digest what you're really going to eat. Is for this year, we're going to do about roughly 61 deals, transactions, but it's going to be about a value of about $40.4 billion in the boardroom sessions that you are all going to be in. So this is what we are creating. A platform for intermediation, a platform for de-risking, a platform for accelerating deals, closure, and with our leaders here to look and say, what are those policies, legal, regulatory things that will preclude deals from happening, and make sure that gets done. That's how you all are going to be involving over the next 3 days in those boardroom investment conversations. That's what we're committing to. And just to finish up, I want to really thank the media, because something was said here that was very important by one of the presidents. Perception matters. Branding matters. Image matters. What we are saying is that Africa is confident in its potential. Africa is not going to beg for development. Africa is going to put its house in order in terms of the things we have to do. We have potential. We're not going to eat the potential. We're going to unlock that potential. And I think the confidence that you see from all over the world with us here is that we believe that when we work together, when we get bankable projects, when we de-risk those projects, that's very important. I must say, here in this forum, we also have two things. We have francophones. Don't yell les francophones qui sont ici. Please use your headphone. Il y a les francophones qui sont ici. Je peux voir les francophones qui sont là. Voilà. Nous avons les francophones qui sont là. Obrigado. Il y a le luxophone that are also here. So I hope we can mix it up so that people will feel very comfortable. Bonsoir, le bienvenue, et Madame Obrigado also. Thank you.
Premier Makura, we're in the boardroom, and I'm sure it's been tabled. How do we ensure that over these 3 days, things are done differently? We've heard the context being set by President Adesina. The Gauteng province is taking the lead in terms of hosting the event. Let me put that to you. How do we ensure that things are done differently?
Well, I just want to say on behalf of governments and policymakers, we also want things to be done differently. We have to ensure policy certainty because in the African environment, for investors to put their money there, there's a lot of other things we've got to fix. So we also not here just about coming to talk. We also have to improve the ease of doing business, the regulatory environment. We have to fix public institutions. So we also here to put additional projects that we want investors to look at for Gauteng province, for South Africa. There's the South Africa project book, because certainly as the host, as South Africa, as the president did last week, a week and a half ago, we also want to attract investment into our economy. So we are here also not just to come and talk. We want transactions, transactions, transactions. So we have projects that are ready to look at. We want to live here counting what the Africa Investment Forum has brought into our economy here. And that's why we are a proud host. We fought to get this bid. It could have gone anywhere. We put the best foot forward, and because we want something out of it. We want jobs to be created. We want our economy to grow. We want Africa to showcase what it can do. And we say, looking at Africa from the point of view of the South, you have the best view of Africa.
President Haja, what does the Islamic Development Bank want to achieve as a collective over the next 3 days, working with your board members here on the stage this morning?
Okay. First, why you want to do things differently? These questions I asked to my staff after 100 years of my presidency of the Islamic Development Bank. And I asked them the question differently. If the Islamic Development Bank does not exist today, it was established 45 years ago. Are we going to use the same operating model as we are here? Do we have the same Islamic Development Bank? If anyone said yes, raise your hand. No one raised his hand. Because then we know that the challenges facing our member countries are tremendous, complex, and one individual institution will not be able to address these challenges. So the first thing is to transform the bank from a bank of development to a bank of developers. Developers means working with the government, private sectors, NGOs, civil society, universities, research centers, and so on, because you want to bring all those together to be part of the development. The second thing is to transform the bank from on-balance sheet fund providing to development, to catalyzer of for development, to enabler of development, to market creator. And this is why we are here today, really to make the market work for development. And this will not be happen unless we change, not just the MDBs change itself, the MDBs and the government itself also. Because the government had the responsibility to create the enabling environment that bring all the economic agents to participate in the development process. Because our end objective is to make a difference in the life of the people, present and the future. And as His Excellency President Adesina mentioned, now in 2016 a promise was made to the world not to leave anyone behind. And the world needs about $4.5 trillion to achieve SDG. Now, the total investment in our developing countries is just 1.4 billion. That means the financing gap is $3.1 billion. That means this is beyond the capacity of all MDBs. All MDBs, the total commitment is $135 billion. That means we need really to mobilize $23 in front of $1, which is the official development assistance. So this is a huge. If we don't do that, what is going to happen? Two things is going to happen. Is the government will continue to finance the development. And in this case, we will need to spend 8-fold from what they are doing now. Other thing, our governments, our countries, most of the countries, especially in Africa, they are exporting raw materials, and exporting with these raw materials also jobs, and creating unemployment, and at the same time rising the immigration in industrial countries. So
President
we have a
Haja,
complexity.
I'm going to take it there. The sense of urgency, I think, is very clear in terms of what you are tabling. Development Bank of Southern Africa, it's your turn to speak in the boardroom. What is the most important thing for you to say in your session?
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. I think from us having heard President Adesina talk about the 44 billion actually that will be signed for here, and Premier Makura, we are saying we will make sure that we crowd in our private sector, the asset managers and the commercial bank and the private investors. The time has never been this right for you to come and work with us. We will make sure that we put in the risk capital that is so much needed to drive this project forward. Actually, Premier Makura said, by the end of this week, I must come past his office because he's going to be able to give me some of the projects that he wants us to look at. So it's quite key, but one of the low actually hanging fruits, actually, so to speak, is the ICT sector. The youth of the African continent is hungry for skills. Your youth is hungry for opportunities. We are saying, Bronwyn, come ask us within the next 12 months in terms of what we are going to see unfolding for the youth of the African continent within the ICT space, as well as how we're going to be driving the infrastructure like you've never seen it before. This is the commitment we have. This is what we are saying to the outside world and to the private sector. To prepare these projects, we need the skills that lies in the private sector. We want to make sure that we fast track these projects so that they become very investable. Thank you very much.
We have to commend the sense of urgency that is building on the panel this morning as we move through the boardroom. The stage is now going to President Orama and the Africa Export-Import Bank. Sir, you have the podium.
Yeah, thank you very much. For us, we think 2018 will mark the year Africa really decided to come out of colonialism, because this is the year that the African leaders decided that the future of Africa would depend on integration of the continent, and signed the Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. This year, and starting today, the African Development Bank has taken the leadership to bring all of us together. And I take the analogy of what President Adesina said. Alone, we are weak. Together, we are strong. If we put the capital, the equity capital of all the banks here is big, can carry so many things. But we go individually to get approvals. We have very low limits, so we achieve nothing. The $1 I have can only go too far. But if we put it all together, it goes very, very far. And in December, the African Export-Import Bank with the African Union and Egyptian government are hosting the first ever intra-African trade fair. That also will begin to open markets for intra-African trade. Investments can only come when there are markets. So we will create the markets that will make it possible for what the discussions we are having here to be meaningful to private investors, so that they know that if they bring investments, the markets exist for them to realize their returns. So we are very happy to be here, and we look forward to very engaging sessions.
Alone we are weak, together we are strong. Let's add that to transactions, transactions, transactions. President Tadesse.
Well, you used the boardroom example. So usually in boardrooms, decisions are made. So I'm already imagining my December conversation with my board, my Q4 board, and I'm going to say I was in Johannesburg and we came up with a consensus on the 3 S's: scale up, speed up, synergize, right? And what that means in practical terms, that means doing things, of course, much more efficiently. I imagine if you put the mic out there, some of the business people who've worked with DFIs like us, one of the things that they might say is DFIs are great partners to have. They help you to de-risk, but they are terribly slow to give you decisions. That is a recurrent theme that would come out of an audience like this. And so my discussion with my board will be to say, how can we speed up practically? How can we give the turnaround expectations the kind of time frame that's required? Synergizing means, for instance, a client talking to me over coffee saying, look, I have a deal. I have a $100 million cement plant I want to put up in the DRC. And they would say, of course, I know you may not be able to do 100 million on your own, but can I talk to you and can you bring your partners in? Make my life easy. I don't want to go and negotiate with 3, 4 banks at the same time. I want to talk to you. Can you find a way to club it? I think this would be very practical. And I'm very pleased to say we are signing risk participation agreements with a number of the banks here, which means in future when a client talks to me, I can do big ticket deals on my own, but behind me, I'm sharing the risk with my colleagues. That is a practical way of speeding up.
Scale up, speed up, synergize. Alain, Africa 50, the decision that you're making in the boardroom this morning.
Yes, thank you. I think I will build again on what my friend Admasu said, especially on the speed part. We at Africa 50, we have the benefit of having been created recently. So we have the benefit of designing an institution where we can have timely decision-making, quick decision-making on the yes and no side. I think I challenge all of us, including our leaders in government and other stakeholders. Let's make sure that we're able to make those decisions. Again, I'm saying on the yes or no side. If a project doesn't make sense, let's say no and move on. If the project makes sense, let's say yes and run fast behind those projects. Africa 50 is able to do so. The board of directors of Africa 50 has delegated the investment authority to an investment committee, which allows us to make quick decisions on projects, because that's how we're going to be able to deliver quicker transactions. And once we deliver those quick transactions, success breeds success. We create a demonstration effect, and we can even do more. So speed is very important, I agree, and scale up, of course. And scaling up will require that we focus a bit more on the early stage project development process. Some people will call it project preparation. It's about building the pipeline of bankable projects and getting them to a stage where many other investors can come in and join the party. We will do that Africa 50, and I hope that more folks will come into that space.
The terminology bankable project is crucial, and it's going to be said over and over again over the next 3 days. Let's take that, Malam, from an Africa Finance Corporation perspective and say we're looking at creating bankable projects. There are many projects out there, but it's now about getting them to bankability. What is the Africa Finance Corporation going to do differently? The boardroom is yours.
Thank you. So at AFC, we have teams of industry specialists and experienced bankers that are able to quickly transform an idea to a bankable project. We have done that in the last 11 years. We have invested $4.5 billion across the continent. We have a huge allocation going forward of what to do in transport, power, natural resources, heavy industries, and telecoms. We are here to listen to your ideas. We are here to work with governments that want to reduce infrastructure deficit or create projects. We are here to partner, leading our balance sheet to mobilize capital for investments in the project. So we're here, we're open for business. Like the rest of us all here are open for business. We have agreed a framework for collaboration. We have risk participation agreements with Africa Development Bank, with AfricaRoom and several other institutions. So if you talk to us, we are able to mobilize resources from other sources as well. We also have frameworks with banks in Europe and China to do the same. So talk to us, we will convert your idea to a project. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And President Adesina, final word to you, sir. I was there at the launch in Johannesburg earlier this year when you announced the Africa Investment Forum alongside Premier Makura. I want to borrow from the speed up, scale up, synergize. You've created that here today, sir. I want you to give us a sense of what you deem the next phase is from a success perspective. When we leave the 3 days that we're about to embark on, what will be your mark of success?
Well, first, let me make 3 points. We won't even be here talking about this issue of scale up, speed up, synergize, that we are all, I like that, what he said about that, without vision. When late Babacar Ndiaye, the former president of the African Development Bank, had the vision and created the AfricaRoom Bank, he had the vision, they created the Trade Development Bank. And then the African Development Bank created a vision that led to the Africa 50. I just want to say that building critical institutions like that, that's why we were able to be here together as what I will call building Africa financial market infrastructure that can drive Africa's development. That's a very, very important thing. So, bless his heart, Babacar Ndiaye is not here, but I hope he's looking down from heaven and pleased that he's built that infrastructure that we can use. The second thing I want to say is the importance of always recognizing that this event is not a show and tell event. I've said the job of a dentist is a very difficult job. You have to really get some deals working. It's a tough job. You have to make sure they are well structured, as Ibobise said. You have to make sure that the risks are divided, project, market risk, financial risk, political risk. We all committed, and there are so many of our partners in the audience to have to do that. And finally, is the fact that we want to make sure that we move things, fast-track closure of deals. So when you talk about what the future will look like from here, we agreed over breakfast this morning that all the heads of the president of the financial institutions and others, we're going to meet actually twice a year, all on deals and changing our business models to be able to advance the things that are going to come out of here. So when you say speed, we are feeling the heat, that we need to change our business model to make sure we can fast-track things. The other thing that I want to say finally is that we're going to have a lot more conversations with so many partners here about how we optimize our balance sheet. That is for a different conversation, but I'm sure that with innovative ways, we can optimize our balance sheet and do more with what we have, because the challenges are huge, but we've got to be very innovative in optimizing the capital at our disposal.
So alone we are weak, together we are strong. Let's go forward over the next 3 days and deliver as one for Africa. Boardroom adjourned. Ladies and gentlemen, please can you give a round of applause for my esteemed panelists. The presidents can leave the stage, and we're going to transition immediately into the executive conversations, which will be moderated by Acha Leke. Please note, we have a 5-minute break, and we would like you to be back in your seats in 5 minutes. Remember, it's all about speed of execution, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much.